My name is Claire Bellamy. I'm 37 years old. I've been a paramedic for 14 years, which means I've spent my career walking into the worst moment of a stranger's life and staying calm enough to be useful. It did not prepare me for the moment my own sister stood up at a rehearsal dinner in front of 14 relatives and told them I'd stolen from our parents. Our parents weren't even there. They were 400 miles away in an assisted living community in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching television, having no idea their names were being used as a weapon at a table they'd never sit at again. I didn't argue. I set down my fork. I did the thing I've trained myself to do at the worst calls of my career. I slowed my breathing on purpose, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, until it was the only thing in the room I could control. And I waited. Because I already knew something none of them did. Something that had taken me 14 months, 6 flights I never mentioned, and a folder of bank statements to fully understand. 2 weeks later, at my cousin's wedding reception, in front of the exact same 14 relatives, my parents would see everything. Not because they were finally in the room, because I made sure the room came to them. If you've ever been made the villain by someone who controlled the story before you even knew there was a story to tell, stay with me to the end, because this one has a reveal I promise you will not see coming. Subscribe and drop the word room in the comments right now, before we even begin, so I know you're staying for the whole thing. Let's go back to the beginning, because you need the whole shape of it to understand what happened in that ballroom. I'm the younger of 2. My sister Vanessa is 5 years older, and for as long as I can remember, she has had a singular, formidable talent. She can walk into any room and, within minutes, become the person everyone in it is orbiting around. It's not fake, exactly. She's genuinely magnetic, genuinely funny, genuinely good at making people feel like the most interesting person she's ever met. Our mother used to say Vanessa could sell a snow cone to a penguin. She meant it as praise. It's also, I've come to understand, a precise description of how my sister operates. She doesn't sell things people need. She sells people a version of reality, and by the time you realize you bought it, you've already thanked her for it. We grew up in a modest split level in Dayton, Ohio. Our father, Harold, worked 31 years as a machinist at a plant that made aerospace parts, the kind of job where precision mattered and nobody outside the plant ever thought to ask him about his day. Our mother, Diane, worked part-time at a school library and ran the house with the exact organizational discipline you'd expect from a woman who alphabetized the spice rack. They were quiet people, steady, not big on drama, which is, I think, part of why Vanessa's talent for producing it always stood out so sharply against the family backdrop. I was the observer. I noticed things. Who was actually upset versus who was performing upset. Who needed help versus who wanted an audience for needing help. I didn't announce what I noticed. I just filed it away, the way you learn to file away 100 small details on an ambulance call before you know which one is going to matter. That instinct is, I think, the entire reason I ended up doing the work I do. And it's the entire reason what happened later was even possible. There's a specific memory from when I was 11 and Vanessa was 16 that I think about often, because it was the first time I understood exactly what she was capable of. She'd borrowed the family car without asking and put a long scrape down the passenger side backing out of a friend's driveway. When our father noticed it that evening, Vanessa didn't deny driving it. She simply said, with total conviction, that she'd noticed the scrape when she picked the car up from the grocery store parking lot, that someone must have hit it while it was parked. Our father believed her instantly. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway, 11 years old, absolutely certain she was lying, and saying nothing, because some early, correct part of me understood that contradicting Vanessa's version of events came with a cost nobody had ever explained to me, but that I could feel anyway. That's the whole architecture of my childhood, distilled into one scraped door panel. Vanessa built the story. Everyone else lived inside it. I don't want to make this sound like I had some uniquely tragic upbringing, because I didn't. Our parents loved both of us, in their quiet, undemonstrative way. I had a happy enough childhood, but there was always this undercurrent. Vanessa as the narrator, me as a character in a story she was telling about our family, one I rarely got final approval over. I moved to Columbus after paramedic school, about 2 hours from Dayton, close enough for regular visits, far enough to have my own life. Vanessa moved to Scottsdale in her late 20s, married a man named Trevor Cole who works in commercial real estate, and built the kind of glossy, photographed life that looks effortless from the outside and, I'd eventually learn, was propped up by a great deal of effort nobody could see. 6 years ago, our parents made the decision, a good one at the time, to retire to Scottsdale themselves, to be near Vanessa and her 2 kids. I understood the logic. Grandkids nearby, warm winters, Vanessa's insistence that she had plenty of room to help out as they got older. I visited twice a year, called every Sunday, sent birthday cards, the ordinary maintenance of a long-distance relationship with people you love. Then, 3 years ago, our father had a stroke. It wasn't catastrophic, as strokes go. He retained most of his speech, most of his cognition, but it left his left side significantly weakened, and after a stretch in rehab, it became clear he wasn't going to be able to live fully independently again. My mother, at 71, wasn't physically capable of managing his care alone. The family decision, made mostly over the phone, mostly by Vanessa, since she was the one geographically present, was to move them both into an assisted living community. Desert Willow Senior Living, a facility about 15 minutes from Vanessa's house. And here's the detail that matters more than any other in this entire story, so I need you to really hold on to it. Because my father's stroke had affected his ability to manage complex paperwork, and my mother had never in her life handled the family's finances. That had always, quietly, been my father's domain. Someone needed to be named power of attorney. Someone needed legal authority to manage their accounts, their care decisions, their bills. Vanessa volunteered immediately. She was there. She had plenty of bandwidth. I was 2 hours away in Columbus, working rotating 12-hour shifts as a paramedic supervisor, and it made a certain kind of practical sense, on paper, for the sibling who lived 15 minutes from our parents to be the one legally authorized to act on their behalf. I signed off on it without a second thought. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for everything that happened after. I didn't fight for that authority. I handed it to her willingly, the same way I'd been handing her the family narrative since I was 11 years old. For the first year, everything seemed fine. Vanessa sent updates in the family group text. Mostly photos, mostly upbeat, our father in physical therapy, our mother settling into a new routine. I flew out every 8 or 10 weeks. I called our parents twice a week directly, not just through Vanessa, because some instinct in me had always preferred getting information firsthand rather than filtered. It was during one of those direct calls, about 14 months ago, that I first noticed something was off. My mother mentioned, almost in passing, that they'd had to switch my father to a shared room at Desert Willow instead of the private room he'd started in because of budget things. I remember sitting very still in my kitchen because I knew, from conversations with Vanessa months earlier, that our parents' combined retirement savings and my father's pension had been more than sufficient to cover a private room indefinitely. I didn't say anything to my mother. I just filed it away, the way I've trained myself to file things away. Then, a month later, my mother mentioned, again, almost incidentally, the way people mention things they've stopped fully registering as strange. That Vanessa had said the facility's fees kept going up, and that they might need to look at a more modest option eventually. I want to be clear about something. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I've spent 14 years training myself to give people the benefit of the doubt long enough to actually help them, because paramedics who assume the worst about every scene make worse decisions than paramedics who stay open and just pay close attention. But paying close attention is exactly what I did next. And what I paid attention to, over the following months, built into something I could no longer explain away as coincidence. I started asking my mother more specific, gentle questions during our calls. Not accusatory, just curious, the kind of questions a daughter asks. I learned that Vanessa had, at some point over the previous year, moved our parents' primary bank account to a new branch closer to her house for convenience. I learned that my mother no longer received paper statements. Vanessa had switched everything to digital, managed entirely through her own login. I learned, from an offhand comment my father made during a good, clear-headed afternoon, that Vanessa had been under a lot of stress with Trevor's job travel. An odd, disconnected sentence at the time, the kind that only makes sense in hindsight, once you know what it was quietly covering for. I flew to Scottsdale 11 days after that conversation, on a trip I didn't announce to Vanessa in advance. I told my parents I had some vacation days I needed to use. I sat with my father at Desert Willow, and during a quiet afternoon, I asked him, gently, if I could take a look at the facility's billing paperwork, just to make sure everything was in order. He said, "Of course, sweetheart. Vanessa handles all that, but there should be a folder in the office." There was a folder. It had 11 months of invoices in it. And when I sat in the parking lot of Desert Willow that afternoon and cross-referenced those invoices against what I knew of my parents' monthly income from my father's pension and their combined savings, the math didn't work. Not by a small margin. By close to $2,000 a month, unaccounted for. I didn't confront anyone yet. I want to be honest about why, because I think it's the most important decision I made in this entire story. I am a paramedic. I know, in my bones, that arriving at the wrong conclusion fast is more dangerous than arriving at the right conclusion slowly. So instead of calling Vanessa and asking her directly, which would have given her 14 months of practice managing the narrative time to construct an explanation, I decided to do what I do at every scene before I say a single word out loud. I gathered information. Over the following 10 months, yes, 10 more months, on top of the 4 I'd already spent quietly noticing things, I built, slowly and carefully, a complete picture. I want to walk you through exactly how, because I think the how matters as much as the what. I requested, as a listed emergency contact on my father's care file, copies of Desert Willow's full billing history directly from the facility's business office, which they were legally permitted to provide me. That gave me the real numbers, not the folder Vanessa maintained. I discovered that our parents had, in fact, been quietly downgraded from a private room to a shared room 8 months earlier. Not because of facility rate increases, which I confirmed directly with Desert Willow had been minimal, but because Vanessa had stopped making full payments 3 separate times, triggering an internal review that resulted in the facility recommending the lower cost option to avoid continued arrears. I obtained, through a bank teller who'd known our family for years and who let something slip during an entirely unrelated conversation about my parents' old account, that the new branch closer to Vanessa's house wasn't simply a convenience transfer. It was a new account entirely, opened under the power of attorney designation, with a secondary authorized user, Vanessa Cole. I am not a forensic accountant. I am not Margaret from a story I've heard before, with a law degree built for exactly this kind of work. I am a paramedic who is good at noticing patterns and refusing to stop until they make sense. So I spent 4 separate weekends, alone in my apartment in Columbus, requesting what records I legally could as a family member and cross-referencing every number I could find. What I found, when I finally laid it all out, was this. Over 14 months, a total of $86,400 had moved out of our parents' joint account in transfers that did not correspond to any documented care expense. Nearly all of it, I eventually confirmed, had gone to the same small handful of payment processors, over and over, month after month. Unfamiliar descriptors that, once I looked them up, turned out to be third-party processors used almost exclusively by offshore sports betting platforms. The transfers had started small, 11 months earlier, and had climbed steadily, almost exactly in step with the timeline of our father's stroke and Vanessa's appointment as power of attorney, as if the authority itself had quietly become the thing funding the habit. I want to be honest with you about how I felt discovering this, because it wasn't the clean, righteous anger you might expect. It was something heavier. Because underneath the anger was an old, familiar ache. The same one from that scraped car door when I was 11. Some part of me still expected that if I brought this forward, somehow, some way, Vanessa would find a version of the story where I was the problem. I was right to expect that. I just didn't know how soon it would happen, or how publicly. Our cousin Meredith, my father's brother's daughter, someone both Vanessa and I had grown up close to, got married 2 weeks after I finished compiling everything. The rehearsal dinner was held at a banquet hall outside Dayton. 14 relatives at a long table under string lights, the kind of warm, easy family gathering where nobody expects anything more dramatic than an overcooked chicken breast. Our parents weren't there. My father's mobility didn't allow for the travel, and my mother wasn't willing to leave him for the trip. They'd sent their love through a card and a check, and everyone understood, the way families do, that this was simply the shape of things now. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found. Not yet. I was still deciding how to bring it forward. Carefully, I'd planned, probably to Vanessa privately first, giving her the chance to explain herself before I involved anyone else. Because even after everything, some part of me still wanted there to be an explanation that made this not what it looked like. Vanessa didn't give me that chance. She took it away from both of us, in front of everyone, over the salad course. It started innocently enough. Our aunt asking how our parents were doing, general conversation about Desert Willow. And then Vanessa, with a practiced, sympathetic sigh, said, "Honestly, it's been a lot. I've basically been managing everything alone out there. It would be nice if certain people," and she looked at me, briefly, deliberately, showed up a little more instead of just calling. I felt the whole table's attention shift slightly, the way it does when a comment is aimed. I said, evenly, "I've flown out 11 times in the last 14 months, Vanessa." "Sure," she said, "for a weekend here and there." I'm there every day, dealing with the actual hard stuff. The billing, the doctor's appointments, all of it. It's exhausting, and I don't really get a thank you. I just get questions. She looked around the table, gathering the room the way she'd always known how to. "Actually, since we're all here, I might as well just say it, because it's been weighing on me. Some money's gone missing from Mom and Dad's account over the last year. A lot of it. I've been trying to figure out how to even bring it up, because I have a pretty good idea where it went." I sat very still. I want you to understand, I had no idea, in that moment, what she was about to say. I assumed, for one disorienting second, that she was about to confess. She wasn't. "I think Claire's been taking money," she said. I don't want to believe it. But I'm the one who sees the statements, and there've been withdrawals I can't explain, around the same times Claire's visited. I didn't want to say anything without being sure. But I can't keep covering for it if it's really happening. 14 relatives went quiet. My aunt's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I looked around that table. At cousins I'd grown up with, at an uncle who'd taught me to ride a bike, at Meredith, the bride, 2 days from her wedding, staring at me like she was trying to reconcile two different people. I didn't raise my voice. I've spent 14 years training myself not to, in rooms far worse than this one. I set down my fork. I did the same thing I always do when a scene is trying to spiral. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, until my pulse stopped being the loudest thing I could feel. And I said, "That's not true, Vanessa. And I think you know exactly why it's not true." She didn't blink. "I'm not trying to attack you, Claire. I'm just saying what I've seen." I could have said everything right there. I had $86,400 of documentation sitting in a folder in my car, in the parking lot, 20 feet away. I could have unfolded the entire truth across that table and watched her explain herself to 14 relatives at once. And for one long moment, some old, tired, 11-year-old part of me wanted exactly that. I didn't do it. I want to explain why, because I think it's the actual turning point of this whole story. More than the money, more than anything that came after. Our parents weren't in the room. And I realized, sitting there, that if I dismantled Vanessa's story in front of 14 relatives who would immediately call our parents with their own confused, secondhand version of events, I would be doing exactly what Vanessa had always done, building a narrative for people who weren't present to verify it themselves. I would be right. But I would be right in the same broken way she'd always operated. And our parents, the two people this was actually about, would once again be the last to know the truth about their own lives, hearing it filtered through someone else's mouth. So I said, quietly, to the whole table, "I'm not going to argue about this here. But I promise you, everyone at this table is going to know the truth, and so are Mom and Dad. Just not like this." I left before dessert. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes with the folder on the passenger seat, and I made a decision. Comment the word room right now if you've ever had to walk away from a fight you knew you'd win, because winning it the wrong way would have cost you something bigger. Because that decision is the entire hinge of what happened 2 weeks later. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't post anything, text anyone, or try to get ahead of the story in the family group chat, even though I could feel it moving without me. A cousin texting me carefully, gently, "Hey, just wanted to check in. Everything okay?" In the specific tone people use when they've already half decided what they think happened. What I did instead was call Desert Willow's business office and request a formal, certified copy of the complete billing and payment history, the kind that comes with an official letterhead and a signature, not the informal records I'd been quietly piecing together. I called the bank and using my legal standing as an emergency contact, and as it turned out, a secondary signer my father had added to one account years earlier and never removed, requested a full transaction history going back 16 months. I spoke to an elder law attorney, a colleague from the ambulance service recommended, a calm, precise woman named Odalys Reyes, who reviewed everything I'd gathered and told me, in the careful language attorneys use, that what I was describing raised very serious concerns about a breach of fiduciary duty, and that I had every legal right to petition for a change of power of attorney if it came to that. I also did the hardest thing in this entire story, which wasn't the confrontation. It was the phone call to my mother. I drove to Columbus's quietest park on a Tuesday evening and called her, and I told her everything, slowly, gently, the way you deliver bad news to a family at a scene. Not softened into meaninglessness, but paced so a person can actually absorb it instead of shattering under it all at once. I told her about the shared room. I told her the number account. I told her the number. $86,400. There was a long silence on the line. And then my mother, in a voice I'd never quite heard from her before, said, "I knew something felt wrong. I just didn't want it to be true, so I stopped asking questions." She asked me what I thought we should do, and I told her. Because it had to be her decision, not mine, not Vanessa's, hers. That I thought she and Dad deserved to see the truth themselves, directly, not filtered through anyone. That's how the plan for the wedding reception came together, not as a trap, as the opposite of one, as the first time, in this entire story, that our parents would get to be genuinely, actually present for something that concerned them, instead of hearing about it secondhand from whoever got to them first. Meredith's wedding reception was held 2 weeks after the rehearsal dinner, in the same banquet hall, the same 14 relatives, plus a wider circle of guests. I'd spoken to Meredith privately beforehand. I owed her that much, given what had happened at her rehearsal dinner. And she'd not only understood, she'd insisted on helping. She was the one who arranged, quietly, with the venue's AV team, for a tablet and a portable speaker to be set up near the head table, ready to go the moment I gave a signal. My parents couldn't travel. But they could, as it turned out, absolutely be present. I'd spoken with my mother 3 days earlier, explained exactly what I wanted to do, and she'd agreed. Not because I convinced her to seek some kind of revenge, but because, in her words, I think it's time I actually paid attention to my own life instead of trusting someone else to narrate it to me. My father, in a good, clear-headed stretch that afternoon, had said simply, "Let's hear it, all of it, together." Vanessa arrived at the reception without any idea what was coming. She'd spent the 2 weeks since the rehearsal dinner, I later learned, quietly telling relatives who called to check in that she was still trying to figure out how to handle things with Claire, maintaining the narrative, refining it, the way she always had. I waited until the toasts were finished, until the room had that loose, warm, several drinks in energy wedding settle into. Then I walked up to Meredith's father, my uncle, who was standing near the small stage the DJ had been using, and I asked if I could have the room's attention for just a few minutes. He looked at me for a long second. He knew, because I'd told him to. And then he nodded and handed me the small handheld microphone. The room quieted the way rooms do at weddings when someone unexpected picks up a microphone, a mix of curiosity and mild concern. "I promise this won't take long," I said, "and I promise it's not going to ruin anyone's night. But 2 weeks ago, at Meredith's rehearsal dinner, some of you heard my sister say some things about me. About money going missing from our parents' accounts. About me being the reason." I found Vanessa's face in the crowd. She'd gone very still, the way people do when they realize, all at once, that they've badly misjudged how much time they had. I told everyone that night that the truth would come out and that our parents deserved to hear it directly, not secondhand. So tonight, I'd like them to actually be here for it. I nodded to the AV table, and the screen behind me lit up. And there, on a video call, sitting together in the small common room at Desert Willow that Odalys had helped me arrange access to for the evening, were my parents. My father in his wheelchair, my mother beside him, both of them visible to the entire reception hall on a screen that had until 30 seconds earlier, been quietly running a slideshow of Meredith and her new husband. "Hi, everyone," my mother said, a little unsteady, but clear. "I'm sorry we couldn't be there tonight, but I understand there's something we all need to talk about together." I want you to picture Vanessa's face in that moment, because I've thought about it many times since. Not triumphant, not vindictive. Just, for the first time in this entire story, completely, visibly out of narrative control, in a room she could no longer manage, in front of an audience she could no longer fully see and read the way she always had. I kept it brief, because that room deserved a wedding reception, not a trial. I explained, calmly, the numbers. $86,400 over 14 months, the shared room downgrade, the new account, and 11 straight months of transfers to an offshore sports betting processor. I held up copies of the certified Desert Willow billing history, the same documents Odaliz had helped me compile, and I said, "I'm not saying this to humiliate anyone. I'm saying it because 2 weeks ago, my sister told 14 people I was the one who did this, and our parents. The two people who actually deserved to know the truth first weren't even in the room to say otherwise. Tonight, I wanted to make sure that never happens again." My father, on the screen, said something I don't think I'll ever stop hearing when I close my eyes. He said, "Vanessa, is this true?" 14 full seconds of silence. I counted them, the same instinct that makes me count compressions on a chest, automatic, unstoppable. And then Vanessa, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her, said, "I was going to pay it back. It started small, just something to unwind with during Trevor's trips. And then it wasn't small anymore, and I panicked, and I didn't know how to say it out loud, so I just—" She stopped. She looked at me, not with anger anymore, but with something closer to the 11-year-old version of both of us, standing in a kitchen doorway, one of us having just gotten caught in a story that didn't hold up. "I made it about you because it was easier than admitting it was about me. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest with you about that, because I could have. I'd earned the right to. 14 months of quiet, careful work. 2 weeks of walking away from a fight I could have won the ugly way. Instead, I just said, 'I know. I've known for a while.' And I handed the microphone back to my uncle, and I walked to the edge of the dance floor, and I let the DJ start the music back up, because Meredith and her husband still had a first dance to get to, and this family, whatever else it was, still deserved one good, uncomplicated night. The aftermath unfolded slower and quieter than the reception itself, the way these things usually do once the adrenaline settles. Power of attorney was formally transferred to me within 3 weeks, through Odalis's office, with my mother's full, clear-eyed consent. Vanessa did not contest it. I think, more than anything, she was relieved to no longer be the one holding a story she could no longer sustain. She agreed, through her own attorney, to a repayment plan for the $86,400, structured over several years, with the first payment already made. It won't undo what happened. It also doesn't need to be dramatic to be real. My father moved back into a private room at Desert Willow within a month, funded properly, correctly, with statements now sent directly to me and copied, at my mother's insistence, to her as well, because she'd decided she wasn't going to let anyone narrate her own finances to her again. Vanessa and I don't talk often. I want to be honest about that too, because this isn't a story where 30-some years of pattern dissolve overnight into warmth. But she called me on my birthday this year, which she hadn't done in longer than I could remember, and the conversation was short and a little awkward and completely, refreshingly honest. No performance, no narrative management, just two sisters who'd finally stopped needing an audience to talk to each other. My parents call me more now, and something has shifted in how they call. My mother asks direct questions and expects direct answers. My father, on a good afternoon a few weeks ago, said something I've held on to since. "I spent 3 years hearing about my own life secondhand and not even noticing. I don't want to do that again, with anything." I think about that sentence often, because I think it's the actual center of gravity of this whole story. Not the money, not the confrontation, but the simple, overdue right of two people to be present in the truth about their own lives, even from 400 miles away, even from a screen propped up in a banquet hall. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you've ever been made the villain in a story you weren't even allowed to help write, The people controlling the narrative can only keep controlling it as long as the people who matter most stay out of the room. Get them in the room. However you have to do it. A flight, a phone call, a screen propped up on a folding table, and the story usually corrects itself. Comment the word room one more time if you made it all the way to the end. I want to know exactly who stayed with me for this whole story. Subscribe to Pieces of Us Revenge. There's another one of these waiting for you next week. My sister made me the villain in front of our parents. They weren't even in the room. They are now. And they always will be from here on out.